I never imagined that mowing my own lawn and grilling with friends would somehow end with the HOA president calling the cops and trying to have us arrested. But that's exactly what happened when Karen decided we were criminals on our own property. If you've ever lived in a neighborhood where one person acts like the HOA gives them absolute power, this story is going to hit home hard. What started as a minor disagreement over a silly rule spiraled into threats, false charges, and a public confrontation that had the whole street watching. You don't want to miss a second of this wild journey, so make sure you stick around to the end and subscribe to Sham Stories on YouTube for more real-life tales of neighborhood chaos, justice, and insane HOA power trips. It all started on a sunny Saturday afternoon, the kind where everything feels too peaceful for conflict. My wife and I had just finished trimming the front hedges when our close friends Marcus and Kayla arrived with their kids. We were planning a simple backyard BBQ, music, burgers, and a few lawn games. Nothing outrageous. No crowd, no loudspeakers, just wholesome fun. The problem? Karen, our self-appointed neighborhood overlord, who just so happened to be the HOA president for Willow Creek Estates, who believed the entire block should follow her personal code of conduct, one far stricter than the official rulebook. Our house sat near the cul-de-sac, and while the HOA technically oversaw general upkeep, they had no jurisdiction over how we used our backyard unless we were building structures or hosting events that violated city code. Karen, however, had a different view. As soon as Marcus pulled up and parked in front of our driveway, barely overlapping the sidewalk, Karen emerged from her front door across the street like she had been waiting in ambush. Her arms were folded, lips pursed, sunglasses halfway, down her nose like a hawk scoping out prey. I didn't think much of it until she crossed the street and said, without any greeting, "That vehicle is in violation of HOA parking standards." Marcus looked at me confused. Is this lady serious? I tried to diffuse it politely. Karen, it's just for a few hours. We're having a small barbecue. Nobody's blocking any driveways. Karen was on a mission. You're not permitted to host gatherings exceeding for non-household. Individuals without HOA approval filed 48 hours in advance. It's in the handbook. No, it's not, I said calmly. I've read the rules. Besides, we're using the backyard. HOA rules don't extend to backyard social use. She leaned in with a smug smile. You'd be surprised how much authority we have over community disturbances. I'll be documenting this. And just like that, she spun around and marched back across the street, phone already in hand. We all exchanged glances, shook our heads, and went on with our day. Music played, kids laughed, the smell of grilled burgers filled the air. But Karen wasn't done. About 45 minutes into the party, a community patrol car, part of the private HOA security teams, lowly cruised past. The driver glanced toward our backyard and pulled into Karen's driveway. She met him at the curb, whispering, pointing, showing him her phone. 2 minutes later, the guard walked up to my gate and cleared his throat. Sir, I've been asked to inform you that this gathering is in violation of HOA Event Code 1 for C. I laughed. That doesn't exist. I'm just passing along the message, he said, clearly embarrassed. Karen called it in. Tell her if she wants us gone, she can call the cops. I replied, then closed the gate gently. That should have been the end of IT, but again, I underestimated Karen. Exactly 20 minutes later, while we were mid-burger and halfway through a cornhole game, we heard police sirens in the distance. Then 2 cruisers pulled into the cul-de-sac and parked across the street. Karen came out like she was leading a parade, clipboard in hand, waving to the officers like she had summoned royalty. My heart sank. Marcus muttered, "No way she actually did it." The officers approached calmly, clearly not in any rush. One of them, Officer Bradley, introduced himself and said they were responding to a complaint about an unauthorized large gathering, suspected disorderly conduct, and public safety concerns. I kept my voice steady. Officers were in our own backyard. No noise violation, no alcohol, no blocked roads, no issues. This is a private barbecue. HOA rules don't override property rights. Officer Bradley nodded. That's what it looks like, sir. But we have to respond to all calls. Would you mind showing us your ID and confirming you're the homeowner? I did. They also asked Marcus and Kayla to provide theirs, just for record keeping, which they reluctantly did. Then came the ridiculous part. Karen stepped in and tried to press charges for trespassing. They're not HOA-approved guests, she insisted. They refused to move their vehicle and ignored formal notice. I am the HOA president and have documentation. Officer Bradley looked at her, visibly annoyed. Ma'am, this is private property. You have no authority to enforce trespassing. Laws here. Only the property owner can do that. Karen was undeterred. Then I want them cited for violating neighborhood event protocol and disturbing the peace. The other officer sighed. There's no peace disturbance. We didn't receive any noise complaints. There's no legal issue here. Karen's face tightened. Then I want a formal report. I want this noted. This man is non-compliant and hostile. Officer Bradley glanced at me sympathetically. You haven't done anything wrong, sir. Sorry for the disruption. I'll file a general incident note, but there's no violation here. The officers left a few minutes later, shaking their heads. Karen stood at the end of her driveway, like she'd just lost a legal battle. And that's when something inside me snapped, not with anger, but with determination. This wasn't just a neighbor with control issues. This was harassment. And now that law enforcement had been used as a weapon in her personal feud, I knew. We had to push back, not just to defend ourselves, but for every neighbor she'd ever bullied. What happened next would turn the entire HOA upside down and expose secrets Karen had kept buried for years. You won't believe how far she went, trying to assert her power and how we finally turned the tables. The moment the police left, Karen retreated into her house like a general who had just lost a battle but was already plotting the next one. I stood in my backyard watching her blinds twitch from behind the window as if she were still recording. Us. My friends and I tried to salvage the rest of the barbecue, but the mood had shifted. Marcus couldn't stop shaking his head, and Kayla looked over her shoulder every few minutes like she expected a drone to buzz overhead. The kids didn't understand why the police had come, but they could feel the tension. That night after, everyone left. I sat down at my desk and wrote a formal complaint to the HOA board, not just about Karen's harassment, but about her misuse of law enforcement, her fabricated HOA rule numbers, and her false accusation of trespassing. I attached security footage from my backyard showing the calm nature of the gathering. Screenshots of the real HOA handbook that proved no such event rule existed. And an audio clip of her demanding the officers arrest my guests. The next morning, I received a brief and disappointing reply from the board secretary. Thank you for your email. The HOA board will review the matter at our next meeting. No date, no promise of action, just a brush off. Wasn't surprised. Karen had been HOA president for 5 years. And while the board technically had 5 members, everyone knew she called all the shots. The others were either too timid, too loyal, or too afraid of being her next target to stand up to her. But I wasn't done. I decided to visit my neighbor, Mr. Clancy, a retired veteran who had lived in Willow Creek longer than anyone else. He had once served on the HOA board, but resigned mysteriously 2 years ago. When I told him what happened, he gave a grim nod and invited me in. Karen's been doing this for years, he said, harassing anyone she doesn't like. I stepped down after she forged my signature on a compliance warning and tried to fine a family $600 for putting up Halloween decorations. I blinked. She forged a signature. I couldn't prove it without starting a legal war, Clancy said. But I've kept everything: mails, board memos, voice recordings from meetings. You're not the first person she's tried to get arrested. Last year, she had a kid's birthday party shut down with a noise complaint that turned out to be fake. He opened a drawer and handed me a USB drive. You want to take her down? This is where you start. That night, I listened to hours of recordings. In one board meeting, Karen told other members, we don't need to follow the exact wording in the handbook. If people don't respect the spirit of the rules, we enforce anyway. Keep the neighborhood clean. In another, she joked about training the security guards to scare the loud ones. There were references to a troublemaker list, mentions of targeting renters versus owners, and suggestions to make life uncomfortable for those who complained. My jaw clenched tighter with every clip. She was treating the HOA like her personal army. With Marcus's help, who happened to be a paralegal, We compiled a detailed report including timelines, evidence files, and neighbor testimonies. We even created a Google Drive folder with indexed links and a timeline showing Karen's repeated abuse of power. Then we sent it to every single homeowner in the neighborhood. Within 24 hours, my phone was blowing up. Emails, texts, even knocks. At my door, neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months were sharing their own Karen horror stories. One couple said they were fined for leaving a hose on the grass for more than 15 minutes. Another resident claimed Karen stood on their property one morning, taking photos of their flower beds, and later claimed they were cultivating invasive species. The most shocking came from a single mother who had tried to build a small playset for her daughter in the backyard. Karen cited her for unauthorized equipment and threatened daily fines. "I paid it," the woman said, "because I couldn't deal with her coming by anymore. She made me cry twice." I realized we weren't dealing with a neighbor gone rogue. This was an orchestrated campaign of intimidation. I proposed we hold a community meeting outside of HOA jurisdiction. Let everyone share their experiences and plan how to respond. We chose a neutral location, the local library's community room. The turnout was overwhelming. 40 households showed up. People took turns speaking at the podium, while others recorded on their phones. Stories poured out: petty fines, fabricated violations, threats of legal action, canceled pool reservations, even tampering with mailboxes to issue warnings. I stood up at the end, presented the USB recordings, the security footage, the forged documents from Mr. Clancy, and laid out one clear goal. Karen has crossed the line from overbearing to dangerous. We're not just fighting a bad HOA president, we're standing up to a bully with power. It's time we hold a vote to remove her. Gasps echoed around the room. But then came applause. People were fed up, and they were ready to fight back. Legally removing a sitting HOA president required a 2/3 vote of members in good standing. The challenge? Karen had been padding the voter rolls with inactive names and had disqualified homeowners from voting if they owed even a $5 late fee. We needed a clean list stand proof of manipulation. That's when Angela stepped forward. She was the HOA treasurer, but had remained quiet out of fear. "I've had enough," she said. "She's been hiding things in the books. I'll help." Angela gave us a copy of the most recent member list and noted which accounts Karen had flagged as ineligible. We found over 20 homeowners marked as delinquent who had actually paid on time. Karen had rigged the system. With that, we launched a petition. Over the next week, Marcus and I knocked on doors, handed out flyers, and walked residents through the process of casting a vote. For removal, every signature was verified, every document copied. Karen must have sensed something was coming because her behavior escalated. One afternoon, she showed up on my doorstep with 2 HOA security guards and handed me a formal notice. "You are under investigation for neighborhood disruption. It's inciting unrest and unlawful petitioning." I stared at the paper. Unlawful petitioning? This isn't North Korea, Karen. It's a neighborhood. She stepped forward, eyes narrowed. "If you don't withdraw that petition, I will file trespassing reports against every person who attended your illegal meeting." That was it. I pulled out my phone, started recording, and said calmly, "Say that again for the camera, please." She froze, then turned and walked away. The next day, I posted the video in our growing neighborhood Facebook group. Spread like wildfire. The final vote was scheduled for the upcoming Thursday. If we succeeded, Karen would be removed from office, possibly investigated for financial misconduct, and barred from ever holding HOA authority again. But we had no idea that on the night before the vote, she would make one last desperate move. That would involve police again, this time with a very different outcome. The night before the official vote to remove Karen from the HOA presidency, everything felt charged with tension. I had trouble sleeping, knowing she wouldn't go down without trying something drastic. What none of us predicted was how far she'd go, turning a neighborhood dispute into a full-on police standoff. It began with a series of cryptic posts on the HOA's official community board. Karen wrote, "Due to ongoing threats and illegal actions against HOA authority, a protective action is being initiated. Be advised, law enforcement is cooperating." She signed it, President Karen, acting in protection of Willow Creek. The comment section exploded within minutes. asked. Dozens of residents asked for clarification, others mocked her, and several demanded her resignation again. At first, we thought it was just empty posturing. But by 9 a.m. the next morning, the day of the vote, things got serious. Angela, our ally, and the treasurer who had exposed the financial manipulation called me in a panic. She filed a police report against you, me, and Marcus. She told them we forged HOA documents and tried to incite a riot. I felt my stomach drop. That's insane. Did they believe her? I don't think so, Angela said. But they're obligated to check it out. Be ready. Sure enough, just 30 minutes later, a marked cruiser slowly pulled up in front of my house. 2 officers approached calmly, their body language relaxed but professional. I stepped outside before they could knock. Let me guess, Corrine again? Officer Bradley nodded. She filed a complaint alleging harassment and forgery. We're obligated to collect statements, but I've looked at the petition documents and your video. Everything you've done appears legal and well organized. I exhaled in relief. So, we're not under arrest. Not even close, he said. But she doesn't know that. She told the HOA security team to try to escort you and Angela from the premises before the vote. That's not how it works. I thanked him, and he left without issue. But Karen wasn't done. She went further. According to Marcus, who had been monitoring the HOA server she once controlled, Corin had secretly sent an internal memo to the neighborhood security guards, telling them to enforce HOA safety protocols during the vote, including prevention of entry by suspended residents and vote tampering suspects. In plain English, she was preparing to block people from entering the community center to vote. We rushed to the location and found 2 security guards already stationed at the doors. Karen wearing a navy blazer with a clipboard in her HOA. President Pin stood between them like a monarch protecting a throne. The second she saw us approaching, she raised her voice and said, "These individuals are not permitted to enter until the investigation concludes." A murmur of confusion spread through the growing crowd. Angela stepped forward. "Karen, you don't have the right to block voting members from entering." "I have a legal duty to protect the neighborhood from disruption," she snapped. "And as president, I'm invoking emergency authority under Clause 8B. There is no Clause 8B, Marcus shouted. "Made that up!" Few residents began filming with their phones. One of them, an older woman named Trish, who'd lived in Willow Creek for 20 years, pointed her camera right at Karen's face and said, "You are not stopping us from voting. You have lied. You've abused this community. And now you're trying to intimidate people." Karen tried to argue, but before she could respond, a uniformed officer arrived on the scene. It was Officer Bradley again, flanked by 2 more deputies. He addressed the crowd directly. "We've received multiple calls about a potential unlawful obstruction of a private community vote. We're here to make sure everyone has a right to enter peacefully. No one is under arrest, and no one will be removed unless they pose a safety threat." He turned to Karen. "And ma'am, unless you have a court order, cannot prevent these residents from entering a public HOA facility. For a vote?" Karen's expression froze. "I am the elected president, not for long," someone muttered, and the crowd chuckled. Officer Bradley added, "I'd advise you to step aside before you cross into criminal obstruction." Finally, Karen relented and moved away from the door, fuming. People filed in one by one. The vote began, conducted by a secret ballot with witnesses present. Angela oversaw the count alongside a neutral third-party volunteer, former HOA president from another town who agreed to help ensure fairness. When the last ballot was cast, everyone waited in silence. The room was so quiet you could hear the click of pens and the shuffle of envelopes. And then the announcement came. Out of 96 eligible homeowners, 78 had voted. 71 voted in favor of removal. 7 voted against. Karen was officially removed from office, effective immediately. Applause erupted. Some people cried, others hugged. Karen stood still for a moment, then bolted out of the room like a storm cloud. But it wasn't over. The evidence we had, compiled emails, recordings, the security footage, and now her attempt to obstruct a legal vote was forwarded to the county prosecutor. Within a week, an official investigation was launched into her conduct. A subpoena was issued for HOA financial records, including Karen's personal reimbursements, contractor payments, and private security invoices. Angela, now acting president until new elections could be held, implemented a complete audit and announced a new transparency rule. Every homeowner would have monthly access to meeting minutes, financial summaries, and a public vote log. The culture of fear that Karen had created began to dissolve overnight. Neighbors smiled again. Tension lifted like a fog burned away by sunlight. And then, as if to cap it all off, we received a letter delivered to several homes claiming Karen had hired a lawyer and was planning to sue the HOA for unlawful termination, character defamation, and public humiliation. Nobody took it seriously. The neighborhood attorney responded on behalf of the board, citing the clean vote, valid process, and ample legal documentation of her misconduct. Karen's case was never filed. But for us, the trauma lingered. It was more than just one power-hungry neighbor. It was a reminder of how quickly authority can turn into abuse when left unchecked. Still, we weren't done. Angela later discovered something deeply disturbing buried in a financial folder labeled Land Services, a contract Karen signed with a private investigative firm, paying them $2,500 from HOA funds for resident behavior tracking. The implications were chilling. Had she been watching us all far more closely than we knew? The mystery deepened, and with it came new fears that she had installed surveillance tools in public HOA areas without consent. What we uncovered next would shock everyone, not just in our neighborhood, but possibly even the city. Angela called an emergency board meeting the following Monday. This time, the room was filled not with tension, but with determination. Karen was gone from power. Yes, but what Angela discovered in the Land Services folder had turned our attention from corruption to possible criminal surveillance. The contract she uncovered was between the Willow Creek HOA and a private investigations firm in another county. The vague line items included terms like resident observation program, asset mapping, and behavioral pattern analysis. There were no board votes authorizing the contract, no recorded meeting discussions. The entire arrangement had been signed solely by Karen months earlier, without anyone's knowledge. Attached to the invoice was a project brief. In it, Karen outlined her need to identify residents at risk of violating community integrity standards, citing specific addresses and even naming Marcus, Angela, and myself as recurring subjects of known compliance. We were stunned. She'd used HOA funds to essentially hire private spies against her neighbors. But it got worse. After reviewing the invoice metadata, Marcus tracked the payments to a PayPal account tied to an individual listed as on-site technician. This person had visited the neighborhood 6 times over 4 months, always during odd hours. Marcus, being tech-savvy and persistent, combed through public Wi-Fi logs from his own router and cross-referenced access times with the technician's alleged visits. He noticed spikes in unregistered wireless devices trying to connect within range of several homes. That's when it hit us. Karen may have installed surveillance hardware in public, facing areas possibly even near people's homes. Angela authorized an immediate inspection of all shared HOA spaces, the clubhouse, the pool area, the park, and the tennis courts. A security specialist was hired to sweep for unauthorized devices. On day 2 of the inspection, they found something. Tucked behind a maintenance panel near the clubhouse AC vent was a small black device, about the size of a deck of cards. It wasn't connected to any official security system, was battery-powered, had a SIM card for cellular transmission, and was designed to activate via motion detection. It was a live-streaming camera. Second device was found at the park, facing the playground. Another one was discovered behind a street lamp near Angela's home. All of them were identical, all tied to the same cellular service provider. Marcus contacted the provider posing as a concerned homeowner and using the SIM card ID managed. To identify the account holder's name, it was registered under a shell company. But a little more digging, thanks to some social engineering and old invoice receipts, Karen failed to link that shell company back to Karen's brother-in-law, a known IT contractor with a shady past. Everything was pointing to a deliberate surveillance network built under the radar. disguised as an observation program but functioning as Karen's personal spy ring. The HOA board filed a formal complaint with local law enforcement. The district attorney was now actively building a case. They classified Karen's actions as unlawful surveillance, misuse of association funds, wire fraud, and potential invasion of privacy across state lines. That week, the neighborhood felt like a swarm of activity. Media vans showed up again. Reporters began interviewing residents. The story ran with a headline: HOA president installed hidden cameras, targeted residents. In secret spying program? Karen's photo, taken from one of our earlier videos, was blasted across the news. Her sunglasses and tight-lipped scowl instantly recognizable. The story caught fire. Other neighborhoods began contacting us, asking for advice on how to investigate. Their own HOA leadership? We were no longer just neighbors cleaning up a mess, we were turning into something bigger, a movement for community transparency. But the more the story unraveled, the more people wondered just how much had Karen really seen? And more disturbingly, how much had she saved? A few days later, Angela received an encrypted email addressed to her official HOA account. The subject line read, "You don't know everything." Inside was a single download link, against better judgment, but after scanning it safely, we opened it. What we found chilled us. A folder containing dozens of MP4 files and screenshots of HOA members inside their homes. These weren't public spaces. These were private interiors, bedrooms, living rooms, couples' heated argument, a teenager dancing in her room. Even a recording of a Zoom call Angela had held last month with her accountant. The camera angles were from outside windows, but zoomed in. These weren't random captures. They were targeted. And the worst part? A video labeled HOA_revolt_plan.mp4 showed a snippet of the library meeting we had held weeks ago, the one we thought was private. Karen had either been outside or planted a device beforehand. It was no longer just a matter of HOA corruption. This was stalking, harassment, borderline criminal obsession. Angela contacted the police again. This time, they involved a cybercrime task force. A warrant was issued to raid Karen's home, which she had abandoned after her removal. Executed it at 5 a.m. Inside, they found a full room converted into a surveillance command center. Multiple monitors, backup drives, a detailed community map with pins and names written in red marker. There were notes about homeowners' routines, what times they left for work, who they had over, what packages were delivered. She had built a psychological profile of half the neighborhood. And in a fireproof safe, they found a list labeled primary threats, with 5 names: mine, Marcus's, Angela's, Clancy's, and a woman named Juliet, whom none of us really knew. Apparently, she had fought back against Karen years ago over a landscaping fine and was labeled a traitor. Law enforcement immediately issued a no-contact order and seized all electronic devices. Karen's brother-in-law was brought in for questioning and ultimately confessed to helping install and maintain the devices, claiming Karen had promised him it was fully legal under HOA policy. The prosecution, however, saw it differently. Karen was now facing charges in criminal court, 11 counts, including felony surveillance, illegal data gathering, tampering with private infrastructure, and intent to harass. A class action lawsuit also formed, with over 30 residents joining in. And still, somehow, she wasn't done. From her lawyer, Karen released a statement saying, "I only ever acted in the best interest of Willow Creek Estates. My actions were intended to keep the community safe from division and disorder. I will not be silenced by lies and betrayal." The arrogance of it all made people furious. But we didn't respond. We let the evidence speak. And what happened next would seal the fate of Karen forever, because as investigators began reviewing her stored footage more closely, they found one final video. One that proved she hadn't just been watching us. She'd been planning something far worse than control or fines or arrests, something that could have endangered lives. The final piece of the puzzle came when investigators completed a digital forensic sweep of Karen's confiscated hard drives. Buried among thousands of labeled folders and surveillance logs was a single file, unlike the rest: no tag, no metadata. Just a generic title. Plan final.mp4. The Cybercrime Task Force assumed it was just another clip, maybe mislabeled, until they opened it and realized what they had found. The video was a screen recording of Karen narrating her own plan, timestamped just 3 weeks before her removal. She was sitting in her command center, facing the camera in a composed, almost theatrical posture. Her voice was calm but chilling. The neighborhood continues to descend into defiance. I will enact what I've called Phase 3. This includes controlled information shutdown. It's the installation of visual deterrence on properties deemed non-compliant and authorized police intervention where necessary. I will stage a formal complaint of civil unrest and prompt the HOA to seek temporary lockdown of shared spaces till order is restored. She went on to describe a list of homeowners, myself, Marcus, Angela, and Clancy among them as agitators, to be neutralized through legal, psychological, and structural means. In her words, control is necessary when chaos is welcomed. By the week. When the lead detective saw the video, he didn't hesitate. The charges against Karen were immediately upgraded to include conspiracy to violate civil liberties and misuse of public resources, including impersonation of law enforcement authority. The DA called a press conference to announce the new charges, stating plainly that this level of premeditated community control crosses from HOA enforcement into criminal authoritarianism. The news spread like wildfire. What was once a story of fines and petty neighborhood politics had turned into a cautionary tale about unchecked power, digital surveillance, and obsessive control. Reporters dubbed her the HOA dictator, and national news outlets picked up the story. Willow Creek Estates became a household name not for its beauty or peace, but for the neighborhood that uncovered and stood up to its own domestic tyrant. Meanwhile, in the neighborhood itself, things slowly began to heal. The surveillance equipment was all removed. The clubhouse was repurposed with an open-door transparency policy. And Angela was officially elected as the new president in a landslide vote. We installed a digital transparency wall and online portal, where residents could see every dollar spent, every rule voted on, and every decision made. No more secrets. No more silent power grabs. But perhaps the biggest victory came not from courtrooms or ballots, but from people learning to speak up. Where once there was fear, now there was connection. Neighbors who had barely nodded before were now helping each other rebuild trust. One elderly couple that had been too afraid to join HOA meetings finally came to a community potluck. A single father whose shed had been painted over by Karen's orders was helped by 5 volunteers to rebuild it. The fear she planted was being replaced by something stronger: unity. Yes. As for Karen, her trial is scheduled for the end of the year. She is currently out on bond, but a restraining order prevents her from coming within 500 feet of the neighborhood. She tried filing a civil countersuit claiming defamation and emotional distress, but it was quickly dismissed with prejudice. Every attempt she made to spin the story fell flat because the evidence was overwhelming. Emails, surveillance contracts, video footage, financial trails, witness testimonies, it was all airtight. During pretrial hearings, her attorney tried to argue that her actions were misguided but well-intentioned, but when the prosecution played the plan final.mp for video in court, the judge reportedly muttered, "This isn't misguided. This is delusional." I was there in the gallery watching it unfold. It's not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed closure. I needed to see that justice could still work, even when someone hides behind paperwork and authority and fake rules. I needed to know that no matter how powerful someone thinks they are, the truth has a way of breaking through. And as the gavel fell that day to accept the new charges, I felt something deep inside me settle. Karen was no longer a threat. She was history. And more than that, she had become a warning etched into every HOA reform seminar, every online discussion about neighborhood governance, and every homeowner's mind who had ever been told, "You can't fight the HOA," because now they knew. Yes, you can. You just need proof, persistence, and a community that refuses to be silent. We turned our pain into purpose. And while we can never fully forget the fear of being watched, accused, or threatened, We've transformed Willow Creek Estates into something better. A place where rules serve people, not the other way around. A place where no one, not even a Karen, can weaponize authority to destroy lives. And if our story helps even one other neighborhood stop someone like her, it's worth it. If you've followed this story to the end, thank you. But don't stop here, because there are more Karens out there, more power-hungry enforcers hiding behind fake rules and intimidation. If you want to see more true stories of people standing up and fighting back, subscribe now to the Sham Stories YouTube channel. Won't believe what's coming next, because sometimes the scariest criminals wear name badges instead of ski masks.